Is aviation a good career choice? Absolutely, 100%. After a 41, coming up 42-year career, I can honestly say I've never worked a day in my life.
Welcome to another episode of The View from the Top, a series of podcasts focused mainly on business aviation. We're sitting here today on Signature Flight Support VIP Lounge. That's where you'll be sitting if you charter a private jet. Alternatively, you'll be sitting over at the main terminal with another 150 passengers on your delayed Ryanair flight. And I have here today Susan Tuddenham,
Hi.
Senior First Officer for Luxaviation, and Captain Chris from the airline world.
G'day, George.
Welcome both.
Thank you.
So Susan, starting with you, tell us how you go into aviation.
So I had been doing some volunteer work in Romania. I had been helping to build an orphanage, which sounds very glamorous, but actually involved working in the heat and chipping cement off bricks. And when I came back, I wanted to raise a lot of money, so I did a charity skydive. And I was sat there waiting to jump, and was watching the pilot and thought, fancy a go, that looks amazing.
So you go from skydiving into becoming a pilot?
I did. So perfectly serviceable airplane. I decided to jump out of it and then thought maybe it'd be better to fly it. So I had a half-hour trial lesson and absolutely loved it, and that was it. I was completely hooked. I just wanted to do that for the rest of my life. And I had a proper job. I'd been to university and got a degree, but I thought, nah, I want to be a pilot, so that's what I want to do.
So you said proper job, so you're telling me a pilot is not a proper job then?
No, George, of course it's a proper job, but it's a lot of fun. So it makes it a lot easier when every day you go to work and you love what you do, because it's not like a job then, it's a passion.
Brilliant. And you, Chris, you got quite a long career, I think, starting back in Australia.
I've been flying for a long time, yeah. So my story is, like many people out there, how did I become a pilot? I was a 12-year-old boy and I'd never been on an airplane before. I'd been to the airport, we'd seen airplanes. My dad was really keen on airplanes. He wasn't a pilot, he was a builder. But we went on a family holiday. I was 12 years of age. I had two younger brothers and a sister, but I was the eldest. And I remember we were boarding a Trans-Australian Airlines 727 at Melbourne Airport. We were going up to see my Uncle Fred in Queensland. And as we boarded, my father pushed me in front of him to one of the flight attendants, hostesses they were called in those days, and said, "My son Christopher wants to see the flight deck," or cockpit in those days. And I said, I didn't know what was going on. I was a shy 12-year-old boy. Next thing I knew, I'm in this tiny little room at the front with three pilots. It was a pilot, there were three pilots to me, the captain, the first officer and the flight engineer. And the captain said hello. And then they said to my dad, "Does Christopher want to stay here for takeoff?" So the short story is I ended up sitting in the cockpit of this 727. We took off. I've never been on an airplane in my life. So I'd never had the passenger experience. And now I'm in the cockpit, we're rushing down this runway, this huge amount of noise and speed, and as we lifted up into the air, I just completely forgot about everything else and thought, this is amazing. When the gear went up and all the noise disappeared behind us, the captain turned around and he said, "What do you think of that?" And all three faces were looking at me, and I said, I'm 12 years old, I'm like super shy, and I'm like, there's three men looking at me, asking me a question. I said, "Are you pilots?" And they all laughed. And then I said another stupid question. I said, "Do you do this for a living?" And they went, "Yeah." And I said, "Can I do this?" And they went, "Of course you can." And that was it. And I just stuck with that goal. Never changed.
Fantastic. And I think I believe you got 25,000 hours?
25,000 flying hours over a 41-year career. I've flown for 6-7 different airlines. I lose track now in 5 different countries. And I've had an amazing adventure.
Fantastic. And you, Susan? How many flying hours?
How many flying hours have I got? I think it's nearing 3,000 now. I will get the book out and check, but yeah, it's going well. I'm enjoying it. So.
You are?
Yeah, loving it.
What is the best part of your job?
Well, for me, the best part of my job is that because I work in business jets, I feel that I love every element. So I get to meet the passengers and greet them, and that's one of my favourite things. As a chatter, I enjoy a conversation, so I enjoy meeting them and welcoming them on board. I love flying a plane, and I love the places that we take them to. So there isn't a part really that I don't enjoy. Maybe 3 o'clock in the morning cleaning out the loo or something like that in some remote airport, but apart from that, it's amazing.
And you, Chris, what's the best part of your job? You fly for an airline?
I fly for an airline, but I think the best part of my job, because it's changed over my long career, the best part of my job now is training other pilots. In other words, giving them my knowledge and my experience from a 41-year career and training new first officers in the simulator or on board the aeroplane and showing them what I've learned over the years, just with a comment here and there. And training's a really strange thing. You're not sitting there watching them fly. You're just adding to their knowledge that they already have. It's called airmanship, and that's what my job is now, and that's the best part of my job.
And I understand you're a bit of a social media celebrity, especially on Instagram. How do you get into that?
Okay, so during the pandemic, as we all knew, after about 2 months, I thought, oh, this will be over in a couple of months. We all thought that, didn't we? We thought 2 months would be all over, we'll be flying by the summer. After 3 months, it wasn't happening that way, and people were losing their jobs, and it was terrible, you know, and I was possibly going to lose my job as well, and lots of my colleagues had already lost their jobs. I was living in France, and I was trapped. I couldn't get to the UK, and that's where my job is. But my son said, why don't you make up a sign like this dude with a sign that's on Instagram and advertise people to go back flying? Because the problem was people had stopped buying airline tickets, so the airlines were now having to shut down because they couldn't sell tickets, so they're going to have to ground fleets. And we all thought this will be over soon, right? So I did my son got me to write on a sign, buy airline tickets like you bought toilet paper. Remember, people were, you know, buying the lots of toilet paper, and it was the thing that was disappearing in the supermarket. So I wrote this funny sign, buy airline tickets like you buy toilet paper, stuck it up on a sign in my uniform, held it up to the sky. My son took a photo with toilet paper, and it went viral. And I had media from all around the world contacting me saying, oh, there's a great campaign. Lots of travel agents were starting to use it, and people were using it all around the world, because again, we all started thinking this will be over and we all get back flying, and everybody knew that you had to sell airline tickets to get people on board the airplanes, but as we know, that never happened. But the actual viral post just kept going throughout. It's nearly 3 years now, but for 3 years it's still out there somewhere.
Well, I follow you on Instagram, and I think your posts are fantastic, very motivational.
You,
so you both work in two different sectors of the industry. You in the executive work, you currently on the airlines, although you've done some private aviation before. What actually makes a good executive pilot? What makes a good airline pilot?
Safety. In both jobs. I was just thinking about safety. Safety first. You know, in the commercial world, there's always commercial pressures. But as I say to anybody, especially guys and girls getting their commands for the first time, the first thing they've done all their training, they've done all their testing, but I say the most important thing is be safe, be legal, and then be commercial. Safe, legal, commercial, in that order, always in that order.
And that applies to both jobs?
Both jobs.
But what about on your side, Susan? What do you think, what qualities that an executive pilot needs?
What qualities does an executive pilot need? Well, I haven't flown for the airlines, but I feel that it's probably different in that I'm involved in all areas of the flight. So a typical day for me might be meeting the captain, discussing the fuel, looking at the weather, liaising with the handling agents, and speaking to the refuelers, loading the bags, meeting and greeting the passengers and boarding them. So it's probably a more intimate or one-to-one environment. And then the planes are different in themselves, so we often might fly something slightly smaller. So there's that bit of personal, more one-to-one service with the clients, which I really enjoy. So that's something that is probably different, I'd imagine, to the airlines.
And the difference, there's many similarities, but the difference with the airline world is probably we don't meet the passengers. You know, that's the cabin crew's job, but we're always meeting different people. In other words, we'll be flying with different co-pilots or other captains. There might be 3 or even 4 of us in the cockpit, and there'll be up to 15 cabin crew. And so we meet each other in the crew room. We just see faces, and we only normally deal with 1 or 2 of the names that are in charge of the cabin, but we need to know who each other is. So we are dealing with people, but it's in a different way. We're dealing with the crew rather than the passengers. We leave the passengers for the cabin crew to look after. So that's a difference, but everything else you said we do as well.
When I got into the industry, executive aviation was a stepping stone for pilots to get to the airlines. But what I've seen over the years, that has changed, probably because pay is so much better in the executive world. Do you see people moving still from the executive work to the airlines, or sometimes we see it the other way? People that they've done the airlines for so many years, then they want something different and they move to the executive world.
Okay, well, I've been for a few years now in corporate aviation or biz jets, and I've noticed that when I started, people often said you have to pick one. You either go corporate or you go airlines, and you'll stay there. And what I've noticed over the years is that may have been true, but since then it seems to have changed. So quite a few airline guys have come to us, and quite a few business jets have gone to the airlines. So I think it's more changeable, and that might be to do with pilot training, opportunities available, and really what people want to do. I think people's attitude to jobs has changed a lot, where someone might have worked for the same company all their career. Now people are prepared to move to get the job that suits them, and move geographically and consider what it is that they really want. So there's lots of people that move because they want to live somewhere different, or because they want to fly a different aeroplane, or because they want a different lifestyle or a different kind of job. So there's a lot more freedom between the two, I'd say.
I think the word you put on there, Sue, was lifestyle. People live for lifestyle now because, as you said, George, the salaries have gone up in the business jet world, in the corporate world, similar to airlines, because it used to be, like you say, somebody would go into the corporate world, get some experience and then off to the airline, because what's important in the airline world is seniority. And you don't have that in the corporate world. In the airline world, it's all about seniority. If you start in any airline, you have to start at the bottom and work your way up. And that's why people don't move from airline to airline, because of a strict seniority system. But you'll find people now coming from the other end of the airline world, the senior guys in my age bracket, looking at corporate as a way of continuing to fly after 60 and 65 years of age, because it's a very interesting business, and again for lifestyle.
How hard is the job in the respect that in the executive world, people quite often think that we don't have a roster, so people fly when they're needed to fly. Things have changed, of course, so most of the executive companies now will have a roster similar to the airlines, Chris. Is it vastly different, those rosters? Do people work harder in one or the other?
Rosters. Okay, when we had this talk earlier, you said, Chris, tell me what the pros and the cons are of your job. One of the pros of my job is we get a roster. So we're told, next month you're flying here, here and here, these are your days off. That's great. The problem with the roster is, that's what you're doing. If one of those trips, if you're going to San Francisco and it's your son's birthday, you don't get his son's birthday. If your wedding anniversary is on a day when you're in Lagos, you're in Lagos. So there's not much changeability with that. So a roster is a good thing and it's also a bad thing. Also, as airline pilots, we're told that in the executive jet world, I have a friend of mine who left the executive jet world because he said things would happen at his company where he'd turn up for work on a Monday, thinking he was working on the Monday, and he'd arrive back at home 13 days later. That was an exception, but he said he just couldn't do that anymore with a family of 3 kids. So there's good and bad in both sides of both aviation worlds.
And from your point, Susan, how do you see the executive world?
I think it's really varied, so it depends on which company you work for and if you work for a private owner. So there's probably a roster that suits you, and everybody has different needs and everybody wants different things. So somebody might really enjoy 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, but someone else might think, I don't want to be away for that long. So I've just come back from maternity leave and my roster is 6 on, 3 off. So during those 6 days, I might be waiting on call, I might be flying about. The job can vary quite a lot in those 6 days, but I'm there for the 6 days and then I've got cover, and then when I come back I'm off. So they can be as long or as short depending on your owner and your company and what the size of your airplane and how far it goes. So yeah, there's a lot of variety.
And I was just thinking then, just butting in there, I was just thinking then about rosters. I remember with the seniority, when you're a junior pilot, my kids were quite young, I could never get school holidays off. Now that I'm a senior captain, I can get all the school holidays off, but I actually don't want them. So there's good and bad with rostering.
Sure. But we talk about the airline world and the executive aviation world, but there are other sectors of aviation. We mustn't forget those. The target towing, the flying instructing, the air displays. Chris, have you had any experience on those?
I think I've done most of them. I've done live target towing for the Royal Australian Navy. I've done flying instruction. I've worked for Channel 7 and Channel 9 News in Australia. I used to do live beach and bay reports from a Cessna 172 on the radio, flying over the beaches with weather reports. I've done cargo flying. I've done bank runs for companies. In fact, I remember I used to fly around Australia delivering ATM machines. And that's how old I am, right? And
Nice.
delivering the money for the ATM machines. So, yeah, I've done it all. Anything to get those...
Did it
those
make
flying
it
out.
there,
Yeah.
or did a few
Yeah,
bits
it made it
just
there.
for...
What I'm saying is, I did anything to get those precious flying out. And if it's flying an
Yeah.
airplane with 2 engines, even better.
Good point.
There's a lot of passion there. I see it in both of you. And I think goes back to what someone said to me the other day, that aviation is like the mafia. once you're in, very hard to get out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an addiction for sure. It's a passion. I really enjoyed the variety of flying before I came, and even in my current job. But I was a tug pilot, and I worked in a fixed-base simulator, and I also worked in a hangar refabricating vintage airplanes. So there's so many different roles you can do in flying. There's turboprops. There's you can fly across Africa. You can do float plane flying. So there's such variety.
People will always ask me, is aviation safe? What do you have to say to the people that they don't really understand aviation very much, but they fly, they go on holidays, they go on a business trip. How safe is aviation?
Okay, statistically, I know this one, and I haven't prepared this one. Is aviation safe? If you went flying every single day for 29 years, you might be involved in an incident, right? And there's a 1 in 100 chance that that incident is an accident. So is it safe? It's safer than walking down the street. And I mean that. The most dangerous part of my job is driving to the airport. That's it. Aviation is safe because we make it safe.
And business aviation, Susan?
Also very safe. So you're more likely to be involved in an incident or an accident driving to the airport than you would in the aeroplane. So there's so many measures in place. Every 6 months we're doing training in the simulator and more training around that. So you take your driving test and that's probably it. Pilots take their driving test at least every 6 months and do additional training as well. So
is business aviation operates in the same standards with airlines?
Yes, it does. We operate at Lux UK, we operate under an AOC, we operate under the same guidelines and practices as an airline. So it's the same safety standards.
What advice do we have to give to young people that are considering their career? I've got two 18-year-olds. They don't really know which direction to go in life. Is aviation a good proposition for them?
Aviation is a fantastic career to be in. I'm involved in something called the Aviatrix project. We go to schools, we talk to young kids from less advantaged backgrounds about the opportunities available to them in aviation. You can be a pilot, of course, but there's so many other careers that you can do. So you can work in dispatch, or you can work in instruction, or you can work in operations. There's just so many different careers and fantastic opportunities available in aviation. And obviously pushing science, technology, engineering, maths, STEM subjects, and making children aware of the opportunities available to them in aviation, of which there are many. There are many jobs as well as being a pilot, which is fantastic.
And you, Chris, you do quite a bit of work on motivating young people.
I motivate people all the time because aviation's been very good to me. So is aviation a good career choice? Absolutely, 100%. After a 41, coming up 42-year career, I can honestly say I've never worked a day in my life. I don't even know what day it is today.
That's fantastic to hear.
I don't know what the day is, right? Because I'm here with aviation people. And aviation people are special people because they think the same way as me. All three of us here think the same way. We come from different backgrounds, but we think the same. Yeah, it's the best job in the world because I've never worked a day in your life. And parents tell their kids, find something you like doing and do it well and the money will come. Because a lot of people think, I want to be an airline pilot because they earn lots of money. If you're doing it for that reason, it's the wrong reason. If you're doing it because you love it, the money will come. And that's in any walk of life. Yeah. If you're behind the cameras here and you want to become a photographer, a cinematographer, you want to work in media and arts, and do that and do it well, and the money will come.
I can second that. I can second that because I go into aviation pretty much like yourselves, completely by chance. I was working at a barman in London. I was heading towards doing a degree in computer science, and this guy walked in, a pilot, and he asked me what I'm doing. I said, I'm going to university in September. He says, no, you're not. You're going to be a pilot. I said, I don't want to become a pilot. He said, you do. He took me flying the next day, and that was it. Ended up being a pilot, and I never looked back. I don't fly anymore, unfortunately, and I do miss it sometimes, but it's a great career. Yeah. And it's a passion, as you say.
It is a passion.
If you love it, I love every day I go to work, I go to the office, I love when I'm here looking at aeroplanes, talking to guys like you, talking to passengers, or looking at aeroplanes. So
I've never worked 9 to 5. And I put a funny thing on Instagram the other day that I remember being at school and gazing out the windows at aeroplanes, and my teacher said to me, nobody's ever going to pay you to look out the window. I get paid to look out the window.
Yeah.
But becoming a pilot is an expensive exercise. So what can young people do to get there? What can we do as an industry to bring these people in?
So how can young people get into aviation and get into flying? It is expensive, there's no getting around that. I didn't have any money, but there are lots of opportunities and availables for young people to get into this industry, and it is a fantastic industry. So I was really lucky. There's quite a few organisations that supported me with scholarships. I was able to build my hours for free as a tug pilot, putting up gliders, and there's lots of opportunities like that. And there's lots of organisations now that are offering support, help, advice, mentoring. Eventually, at some point, you might have to take out a loan. I certainly did, but there are opportunities and means. If you've got the passion and you've got the motivation and you've got the enthusiasm, you will get there. There's ups and downs. It's one of the biggest challenges and barriers to getting into flying, but you can do it. And now there's a lot of support from industry that are encouraging and supporting and offering opportunities for people to get into flying.
Well, we see in our industry there's a shortage of pilots, and that will only get worse as time goes on. So Chris, what's your views for us as operators, as employers? What can we do to bring more people in?
As employers, you're doing exactly the right thing by having a podcast or an interview system like this, where we can tell people there are opportunities for people to get into the industry. There's so many. There's, you were just saying there, Sue, there's the Air League, there's the Honourable Company of Airmen, there's lots of scholarships out there that people don't even know about. I sponsor most of them, and I'm involved with them with trying to tell young people how to become pilots. Because the easiest thing is to say, oh, I can't be a pilot because I haven't got any money. I came from no money. I've become a pilot, I did it, right? I can do it, and I can tell you how I did it, but we haven't got time for that. But what I'm saying is, what can employers do to help people become pilots? Education, right? Telling people that anybody can be a pilot. There was a thing in the States where they got children to draw a picture of a pilot. They all draw a male, right? There's 50% of the people out there in schools are female, right? And they're not being told they can be a pilot. So having Sue here as well to say, yeah, anybody can be a pilot. You don't have to be a man to become a pilot. It's not a man's job. It's a person's job. Right?
And I think it's a fact that we need to bring more women into our industry. And I find, personally, I've been in the business for 28 years, I find lady pilots very competent, very good at the job, especially in business aviation, where the personal touch makes a lot of difference.
Thanks, George.
No, that's the thing.
Don't look for a pay rise.
You need to educate people. One, that girls can become pilots, right? That wasn't an option in my generation. It wasn't something people thought about. And that's 50% of the population you're missing already. Okay, the next thing is showing them how to do it. It is expensive, but you can find the money. If
Does a young person, sorry Chris,
I was going to say, if you go to university, that costs almost as much.
Right.
Sure, of course, you still have to get a loan, and it still will take you 3 or 4 years. Does a young person need to be quite academic to become a pilot?
I only know my 3 times table.
Me too.
Right. We
I
joke.
can second that for sure.
I'm saying this now, live. I got a D for maths, and I'm an international airline captain, one of the most senior trainers in the world. I got a D for maths at school because I didn't like school. I hated school. But I knew that I had to learn maths to become a pilot. So during my training, I got better at maths. Not great, but you don't have to have great marks. You just have to love what you're doing, and you will find a way to overcome those hurdles. And there's lots of hurdles, but you'll overcome them.
Well, Chris, I'm quite impressed with your D. I can't even remember, it's such a long time ago what I got in my maths. But yeah, I don't think it was even a D.
Yeah.
Right, so I'd like to, tell me one strange experience you had during your career. One that you had to cap that stayed in your mind. I think we can all say as pilots that our first solo, the first time the instructor said to me, off you go, you can do this flight on your own.
You never forget that.
You never forget that. But moving on from there, going to, during your careers, what would you say one event that you remember?
That's a great question.
Okay, I'll go first while you're thinking. So the one great event I will never forget is being a 31-year-old long-haul captain on an Airbus A340-300 flying into the famous Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport in a rain shower, a storm, with my dad, who's 84 today, on the jump seat, and one of my brothers on the other jump seat. I'll never forget that experience.
Wow.
That was
Yes,
amazing.
I remember.
Wow.
Happy birthday to your father, by the way,
Happy birthday.
in Australia.
Happy birthday, Dad.
Oh, it's nice. So I think one of my most memorable moments is that I said I got into flying because I was watching the skydive. I was watching the pilot as I was about to do a skydive, and I was raising money for a charity in Romania. And I remember, probably about 10 years later, flying into Bucharest, Romania, and thinking, if you had given me an awful lot of money, about perhaps one of your ATM machines, I would never have put money on this. Just hadn't thought of it, didn't consider it, had that trial lesson, absolutely loved it, was completely hooked. I thought, wow, I can't believe I get to do this job for a living. I love it.
Give me a funny story from your career.
Funny story. Well, George, remember before 9/11, anybody could come into the flight deck. We used to love having visitors into the flight deck, and all the celebrities used to come in. I've met Elton John, the whole cast of Friends. Kylie Minogue sang to me once. But I remember flying into Los Angeles once. We were on final approach, and the flight deck door burst open during the approach, which was unusual. And in came Leslie Nielsen from the Airplane movie,
Wow.
and he said his famous line, "We just want to say good luck, we're all counting on you," and then left. Couldn't stop laughing.
That's brilliant. And just for clarification for the Civil Aviation Authority, it was before 9/11, and the cockpit door was not locked. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Chris, what about you, Susan?
So I have a funny story. We were flying a band around on tour to all the festivals, and Rita Ora and her support acts were on board. The plane is emptied. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, that's great. We're all back. Everything's great. The plane's brilliant. And I just went to tidy a little bit in the cabin, opened the toilet doors, and Rita Ora is in there touching up her makeup. And I was like, I'm so sorry, I thought everybody had left, and shut the door. And she was the coolest girl in the world. She opened it again. She goes, nah, no problem at all. Does my lips look okay? And I was like, you look great. You look great. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and you look amazing. So
That's the perks of business aviation. You get to know people. I'm going to be a bit controversial now and talk about the future. There's a lot of talk on social media, in particular, Chris. I think we've been involved in one of the posts about single crew aircraft, or indeed no crew aircraft. What do you think about it?
Talking about single crew aircraft, I think it's coming. I don't like to use the word inevitable because it sounds like a powerful word, but I think it's coming in aviation.
Is it safe? Would the public be happy with one pilot up front?
That's a really good point. The public. Who are the public? Right? Airbus did a research into this, and they asked school children, would they be happy with no pilots or a single pilot? Do you know what the kids said? Isn't it the pilots that crash the airplanes? These are the passengers of tomorrow. These are the people buying airline tickets tomorrow.
Sure.
People our age don't want any less than 3 pilots.
Yep.
Okay? Yeah. But we're seeing, and as pilots ourselves, we can see that aircraft are very well automated. They're very safe. We used to fly in airplanes that had 4 engines because they needed 4 engines to get across the Atlantic, because they normally lost one. Not lost, but one would stop. Right? Then they went from 4-engine aircraft to 3-engine aircraft. We have now 2-engine aircraft, and we all know here they're incredibly safe. So reducing the pilots in the cockpit from like navigators and engineers and 2 pilots, it's been 2 pilots for a long time. I think the single pilot will come, but there will be somebody else on board the airplane who's trained to land the airplane. And that person they'll probably start off with that person will do simulator, but they may not have a pilot's license. They might be like in the general aviation world, a pilot's assistant. They might have a basic license. And I think aviation will go that way. I'm not saying unfortunately, I think it will go that way. And then maybe when I'm gone, they will have pilotless aircraft.
So as a young pilot, as a young person that'll be looking to become possibly a pilot, should I be worrying about it?
So should a young pilot be worried about single pilot and no pilot cockpits? No. The Airbus A350, the aircraft I fly, is one of the newest aircraft in the world, and they're still being built now. And they're going to be built for the next 20 years. That aircraft will have a lifespan of 20 to 40 years. So if somebody's 20 years of age starts to fly on that aircraft, there's a 20, 30-year career for them. And that's just one aircraft. They're not going to single pilot cockpits yet. So even if that took another 20 years to come in, they'll have plenty of time to see how that affects their career.
Final question. I walk into a room full of people. How do I know someone is a pilot?
He'll tell you.
Thank you. That's a great answer. It's been great chatting with you, and thank you for joining us. That was great.
Thanks, George.
Thank you very much for the invitation.